for being here. Yeah, Yadi. I'm still selling tickets to the Dylan at Birdcliff. They're $10 a piece. Cashier, or go online and do it on PayPal. We've had the wildest day here today. So I'm so glad everybody's here and everybody's been so sort of sweet and kind and understanding about delays and stuff. So this panel came together so well, so easily. Everybody's been great. I just want to introduce Marianne Schnall. Everybody should know her. She started feminism.com. She lives in Woodstock, and she's the author of What Will It Take to Make a Woman President? I could cry. Conversations about women leadership and power, leading the way, Dare to Be You, inspirational advice for girls. She's a widely publicized journalist, interviewer, and Forbes Women contributor, whose work has been on CNN, HuffPost, Glamour, Women's Media Center, and many others. She's the founder. Oh, Jesus, sorry. Sorry, I forget. I'm used to talking so loud at home, I think everybody can hear me. This is Marianne Schnall. She's, I could go on all day. She's really been the leader of the feminist movement for decades. And she has been such a joy to work with this time. We worked before together on this festival, but this has been just a joy. I'm thrilled that she's here. When I started putting together the festival, it was in October, and I was going to do an all-women festival because we're going to have a new women president, and then I just sort of sunk in November and said, I'm not doing it, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, here we are. And so I'm thrilled to have Marianne. She's going to introduce everybody. I don't know what she's going to do. I haven't asked. Anyway. I'm still selling tickets to the Dylan raffle, is what I was saying that you couldn't hear. It's $10 a piece. There are only 100 tickets sold. We're going to draw the winner tomorrow afternoon. All right, I'll stop. Thank you.
Well, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. If you're here today, you're well aware that women are experiencing unprecedented rollbacks to our reproductive freedom, as well as to so many other rights impacting our lives, safety, and well-being. And even though we are focused on women's rights on this panel, I do want to also acknowledge that there has been an ongoing onslaught of additional attacks impacting so many other marginalized communities. In fact, there are so many concerning things happening daily right now in our country, it's hard to process and keep track. But this conversation today will be primarily shining a spotlight on the ongoing assault to reproductive freedom, since that has been happening so quickly and so drastically, and is largely not covered in mainstream media, often getting lost in the ongoing chaos that we're seeing every day. Yet ever since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, women's bodily autonomy and lives are under attack, which we are seeing play out in horrifying ways every day. So now is the time to educate ourselves about the implications of the reality we're now facing in Post-Roe, and to explore impactful ways we can all take action to make sure that we protect all of our hard-won rights and not further regress. And to do that, we are so fortunate to have three very brilliant writers and experts on these issues for this discussion today. I will briefly introduce our esteemed panelists, but I do want to say these are very short, little bios, so I encourage everyone. There's a lot of information. They have a lot of books and writings that are available online, but I'm going to start first with Jessica Valenti. Jessica is the award-winning author of 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller Abortion, which came out in October 2024. She is widely credited with sparking feminism's online wave as the founder of the trailblazing blog Feministing, and currently writes the newsletter Abortion Every Day, which you can find at abortioneveryday.com. Clara Bingham is an award-winning journalist and the author of the movement How Women's Liberation Transformed America 1963 to 1973, which came out in July of last year. A former Washington, D.C. correspondent for Newsweek, her writing has appeared in Vanity Fair, The Guardian, The Daily Beast, among others. And Jamia Wilson is an award-winning feminist activist, writer, and speaker. She is currently the vice president and executive editor at Random House and the author of several books for all ages, including Make Good Trouble, which was just released in February. Jamia is also on the boards of the Omega Institute, ERA Coalition, and the Center for Reproductive Rights. too. So I want to start with you, Jessica, since as your newsletter title suggests, you literally write about abortion every day. In the wake of the Dobbs decision in 2022, which overturned Roe v. Wade, you have been doing such critical, comprehensive, and valuable reporting on what is actually happening to reproductive rights and women's health care across this country, which of course you also cover in your new book, Abortion. So can you give us your assessment of what is happening today and what concerns you the most?
I mean, my assessment is that we're fucked. And my concern is everything. That's such a hard question because there is so much going on. I think one of the most difficult things about writing about abortion every day is that you can't possibly cover it all, right? It's just this constant onslaught, which is very much the point. The idea is to make us completely overwhelmed, completely exhausted, feel like there's nothing that we can do about it. And so that's part of the reason that I started the newsletter, was to hopefully give people a little order in the middle of the chaos. So I guess I can tell you what I'm most worried about this week. That might be the best way to sort of frame this. This past week, what I'm most worried about is the criminalization of miscarriage patients. I don't know if anyone saw this story. You probably have not, because it has not been covered by any mainstream outlet, but a young woman in Georgia was arrested for how she disposed of her miscarriage. It's just, literally her mugshot was in the crime pages, in the local Georgia crime pages. They've just dropped those charges, thank goodness, but that was because of a public backlash that was sparked mostly online through viral TikToks, things like that. But it was bad enough, the criminalization, but it's the normalization that really, really keeps me up at night. The fact that this was not covered in mainstream outlets, the fact that this is being treated like business as usual, that is really the thing that I worry about the most. The fact that this is just normal for a lot of people, right? It's become normal for the people in power. It's become normal for newsrooms. And I think unless we start to really take those institutions and call them to account, it's gonna get worse. I'm such a downer, I'm sorry. That's not to say there's not hope. I think that there is. I think the fact that these charges were dropped, the fact that when people do find out about what is happening locally, they do take action and change is able to happen. I think that that's amazing, but people can't do that if they don't know, right? And so that's why I focus so much on media outlets and local and national coverage. So that's my big thing right now is criminalization and media coverage.
I just want to say that I encourage everybody to follow her, because in addition to her newsletter and the book, even on social media, and she's just out there, I can't even tell you how much I learned from.
She's one of our greatest resources.
1,000%, yes.
Thank you.
That's true.
I appreciate that.
Clara, you of course have written extensively about the movement for women's rights and about how the women's liberation has transformed this country. So how do you understand kind of this moment in time and kind of the long arc of towards, trying to fight for equality in terms of this moment that we're at right now?
Well, it's pretty befuddling.
Yeah.
When I started writing this book, it was 2019. So Dobbs had not happened. I interviewed 120 women between the ages of 75 and 95, asked every one of them, did you have an abortion? And the surprising answer was multiple. It wasn't just I had one, it was many. And so I wrote their stories in this book, and I remember writing one of the, harrowing war story chapters when the day that Dobbs came down. And so it's been kind of incredible to sort of talk about this book and write this book at the different stages of history that we've gone through just since 2019. There's Dobbs, then there was the election. The book came out in August and it looked like Kamala Harris was going to be our president. And then Trump got elected, but there was, of course, the inauguration. And then where we are now is even, more traumatically horrible. And so I look back at these heroes of the second wave and look for sort of jewels of wisdom from them. And one of them, I have a few of them I wanted to talk about, but one of them is Pauli Murray, who was I consider the legal architect of the second wave, wrote a brilliant brief that was published in GW Law Journal in 1965, right after the Civil Rights Act was passed, called Jane Crow and the Law. And that is what we're living through now. What she did in that legal journal was describe all the different laws in America that were very different for women than men, and they were the kind of things that eventually Ruth Bader Ginsburg would tackle in the Supreme Court. But we now have women in banned states who are living under Jane Crow. And understanding, I also feel that it's so important now for people to know what it was like then. And it's too easy for women who don't live in banned states to kind of shrug it off, and think, oh, it's not my problem, or they can always travel. And just to remember that in 1973, when Roe was passed, 1 million women a year were getting illegal abortions in America and risking their lives. Around, we don't know exactly the number, but it was between 1,000 and 5,000 women were dying because of this. And so we're going back to, as Jessica's, described so well every single day, we're going back to Jane Crow, and we're going back to our humanity not being respected. We are no longer first-class citizens in banned states. And we have to also look at what happened in the second wave and organize both legally, because there were a few cases that never made it to the Supreme Court. The most important one, I think, was Abramowitz v. Lefkowitz, which was a New York State class action. And 350 women signed on to it. And it was this incredible organizing tool. And the idea was to confront the constitutionality of abortion laws under the 14th Amendment, that this was really about liberty, not privacy, which is what Roe was eventually decided on. And unfortunately, it became moot because in April, actually, April 11th of 1970, the New York State legislature legalized abortion. So these kind of like massive class actions, and then they had them also, there was a massive one after that in Connecticut, and they were all building up before Roe actually made it to the Supreme Court. Looking at things like that, how to build coalitions and how to legally create massive class actions that will have a huge impact and move, millions of people to try to change.
Of course.
I just wanted to jump in real quick. The thing that's really interesting about the 14th Amendment is that is what anti-abortion activists are using right now to fight for fetal personhood, right? Anytime you see the 14th Amendment mentioned, that's what this is about. They call them equal protection bills. If you ever see an equal protection bill in any state, it means that they are trying to charge abortion patients as murderers, literally. And there were 11 states since January that introduced legislation like this. And the other thing I wanted to say about illegal abortions, thank goodness, the one thing that has changed is that self-managed abortions are so much safer. We're in a position where illegal abortions, people don't need to get illegal procedural abortions for the most part. Abortion medication really has changed the game in this really incredible way, and that's why you're seeing so many attacks on the pill specifically. Thanks for letting me interject.
So important to have all this context. I also want to acknowledge that I don't even know if Martha knew that we were going to be, what's the name of the protest going? It's Hands Off Protest Day.
Right now.
So, we all are going to need to be speaking up. And so speaking to Jamia, your new book is called Make Good Trouble, which was inspired, of course, by civil rights activists and Congressman John Lewis's call to challenge injustice. And your book explores famous moments of global activism throughout history with more than 70 inspiring narrative stories. So what do you think it means in this moment to, quote, make good trouble?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited and also inspired to be with each of you on this panel today, because we're making good trouble by having this conversation today on the hands-off protest day where there are 50 protests in 50 states and around the world. My friends in London and Paris sent me videos, and they are also protesting for us because these laws impact us all over. And that's one of the reasons this book, which was for middle grade readers, but it's for readers of all ages who like illustrated books and history, is because I have given a lot of thought to, as a woman reading the statistics, about when girls start to lose their confidence, when girls are gaslit into questioning their feelings of self-dignity, self-determination, and sovereignty. And I grew up in a patriarchal church system, and so I'm still a very spiritual person, and I identify as a Christian mystic. But I, very much started to realize, when I started to question patriarchy, when I started to question right and wrong, it happened actually within the church that was supposed to be guiding my own sense of understanding what those values are. And where I first became aware of the issue of abortion was when I was growing up as an American expatriate in Saudi Arabia. During a very different time. This was not when people could go to Saudi Arabia on tourism. And I was going to underground Sunday school. And I went to my liberal, Black, Southern pragmatist parents, always Democrats, and said, today at Sunday school, they were talking about abortion. What is that? And they were telling us that these people are terrible people who get abortions and the people who facilitate them. And I came with all this rhetoric, and my mother sat me down with a cup of lemon tea and said, there are people you love who've had abortions. Here are the reasons. These are the systems in our society and the reasons why they've had to have these abortions. This is why some of the people who are just as smart as you are, who've been in our family and haven't had access to the education you've had, will be working for the same factory for the rest of their lives. And you absolutely believe in access to abortion. And you can still be a Christian, and you can still be these things, and making the good trouble is being unafraid to speak truth to power and to speak about what you know is true. So when I started to learn that sometimes that wasn't so welcome in a lot of spaces, to be a cycle breaker or truth teller or scapegoat, if you want to call it one of those things, it's made me really identify with that younger part of myself and the treatment I experienced in the church and other spaces because I would speak out. And so when Representative Lewis said, make good trouble necessary trouble, as he was about to transition from this world, I thought about how he got started doing this work when he was 13 years old, I think was when he was first on the big public stage doing his work. And what would it be like if young people never lost that sense of being entitled to the dignity of knowing their truth and knowing that we don't have to inherit a world and just accept it as it is. We can continue to fight for what we know is right for the next generations to thrive. And so that got me really curious about where in the world has that happened before, and what are the movements that we can learn from, the mistakes people made, the good things that happened. What are the ways in which people used youth activism in bad ways? So, I engage Hitler Youth in this book as well, and talk about the people who were countering it, like the Edelweiss Pirates and also the Jazz Swing Kids, to also show how we have to be vigilant about what it means to speak our truth together and also to hold each other accountable. And so when I started working on it, it's similar to you. I started working on this around 2019. And then I started to see that the world was changing. And I said to my editors and publishers, because I also work in the business, I know we were planning a specific pub date, but I see that I think we're having a year coming to us that will be like 1968 was, where it'll be many years within a year. Yeah. And we need to see what happens there, because those young people need to be in the book too, around the world. And so and they totally trusted my gut on that, and that's how this book was born. And so although I was hoping that it would be born into a time where Kamala Devi Harris would be the president, and we could keep saying, hey, continue to safeguard and defend. Now this is actually a playbook for young people to look at what are ways people made good trouble, and how on my own behalf can I make good trouble in my local community and global context.
Yeah, yes. the book is so inspiring, and I have two daughters that are big fans of Jamia's work, and certainly I think we need young people to speak up, and more they are. And part of I think activism right now is also just being informed. So again, with huge gratitude to Jessica for all that she does. As I mentioned earlier, your newsletter, Fortune Every Day, does exactly, you literally are covering it every single day. And given how in the weeds that you are,
Sure.
what are some of either the pieces of legislation you've covered, or what are some of the stories that you think have been overlooked by the mainstream media, but you really think that we should know about?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, those equal protection bills that I was mentioning, the fact that they are literally bills that would charge abortion patients as murderers with homicide, and in a lot of these states that could mean the death penalty. And we've sort of been told that these are extremists, these are outlier, legislators who are doing this. Some of these bills have 24 co-sponsors, right? And we're not talking about them in that way. Georgia, which is, I think they just killed this bill 441. When Georgia media covered it, when the Associated Press covered it, they covered it as a total abortion ban. There was no mention of the punishment piece, and that is very much what they want. They want no one to really understand what these bills would actually do in practice. And then the other legislation that I'm really worried about, and that's why I'm so glad you're talking about young people and working with young people. The anti-abortion movement right now is putting so much energy, effort, policy effort, legislative effort into young people. Not for what's going to happen with young people tomorrow, but what young people are going to turn into 20 or 30 years from now. There's a legislative trend I've been following called the Baby Olivia bill, and there's about 15 states that are considering it. 2 or 3 states have already passed it, and it would force an anti-abortion propaganda video into public school classrooms. And it would force it into science and health classrooms, because unlike sex ed, which you can opt out of, you can't opt your kid out of science and health, right? And so they are thinking so strategically about this, and they are trying to completely overhaul the national educational guidelines on how we teach fetal development and embryology, to teach that personhood begins at conception. And the reason they're doing that is that they know that young people are the most pro-choice demographic in the country. They know that they need to intervene as early as possible. And they also know that, unfortunately, I think Democrats and the mainstream pro-choice movement takes young people's support for granted. We sort of think that they're always going to be there. Young people are always going to support abortion rights. That's not true if you have legislation like this, if you have the really insidious cultural campaign that's been happening on TikTok and Instagram Reels. They are everywhere. And so those are sort of the 2 big things I'm thinking about, is what they're doing for the next generation and the way they are advancing extremism without anyone noticing.
Absolutely. No one notices at all.
There's even, and I'm pretty in the space, and there are certain things that happen that I only learned from clicking on one of your Instagram stories, like what happened with Title X this past week. There's so much that's happening that it's sort of even hard to contextualize and keep track.
Right, yeah, Title X, they cut $35 million for birth control for poor people, right? And this is what I try to explain in the newsletter. It's they don't need to pass a law that says birth control is illegal in order to make birth control impossible to get, right? They can say, well, we didn't pass any laws that said birth control was illegal. We're just gonna make sure that first, no poor people can get it. Then teenagers can't get it. Then we're gonna say it's really bad for you. So you're gonna need to go to 3 doctors, right? They're doing this slow chipping away approach in the same way that we saw with abortion rights.
Oh my goodness.
I told you I was a downer. I wasn't joking.
Well, we need to know so that we can get ahead of all of this. And, I think, with Clara, your book, The Movement, specifically covers the 10 years that, leading up to the Roe v. Wade decision. You touched a little bit on this earlier, but are there any lessons that you think, feminists or those of us who are concerned with this can learn from those who lived before Roe and fought for it as we adjust to and resist to after Roe?
Definitely organizing. And the second wave was essentially a perfect storm of activism, because so many of the women who were involved in the movement had been involved in either or both the civil rights movement in the South and the anti-Vietnam War movement. And so many of them had cut their teeth all during the course of the 60s in how to coalition build, how to build, groups of people together, how to consciousness raise. They had, hundreds and hundreds of consciousness raising groups all over the country. And by the time these women realized that their comrades in arms were really sexist and that there was this incredibly hypocritical, situation they were in, and they broke off on their own, they had the skills to make change. And so we need to do that same thing. And I think it's so important to coalition build, that we need to we have now such a serious enemy that we can all coalesce against, that I'm hoping that will help everyone get over whatever our differences are, because as we know, the left eats its own. And if we can do whatever we can to get to sort of surpass that problem, so that millions, and we need millions of women and men to work together, that's, I think, our real hope.
That's so true. I mean, one of the things I'm hoping that will come out of this is that our movements generally will be stronger. I had the honor of interviewing, if you all know, Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. It's really time for us to come together. It's across everything that is happening right now. So Jamia, what can we learn from sort of the stories that you uncovered in your book that can give us energy and direction today? All of your stories are so inspiring, but are there, any that you think of that really would resonate in this particular moment in time?
Thank you so much for this question. I have learned so much. So I researched the book myself, and that was really important to me, partly because I'm just a big nerd, but I also really wanted to go in and sort of engage with all this, because it was about answering a question that I was really seeking to dive into the rabbit hole of. And what I found was these stories that we should all know, that we should have all been taught about in school, that can really help us find the way forward, because sometimes we feel like we need to invent something when there are already humans who've tried things, done things, triumphed or failed, that we can learn and build on, or also innovate and iterate on our own behalf. So one of the examples for me, I thought about today, this beautiful story of Bessie Watson, who was a girl bagpiper in UK who had been ill, and she had tuberculosis in her family and had to live sort of a bit of a sheltered existence, but she had her bagpipes that they were using therapeutically. And she was so inspired by Emmeline Pankhurst and the suffragists that she would go and play outside of the prison while these women were being tortured and locked up, and play them songs as a child after school. She would race there to play her bagpipes. And so today, when I saw Indivisible posted videos of bagpipers marching today for Hands Off, I thought, oh, that's the spirit of Bessie coming to us, that she started that. And also, to give us an example that we can all get in where we fit in. We don't always have to all do the same thing. That's one of the things that I really learned. There are people here who use their art, their voices, their music, their faith, their community, their ability to bring people together, their ability to recognize patterns and share them with other people. Whatever it is we each have, we can be expansive and not in scarcity, like you said about the infighting, and to come together and realize that we don't have to sort of be fighting over who has control of the message. We have enough problems to solve that we need all the strengths to fix them. So what I really loved about that is just, that example, or the water protectors in Standing Rock, and the young people, water protectors from First Nations community, who were coming and doing a lot of things, from marching, helping the elders in the community tend their gardens on those lands, helping to support the traditions and protection of the traditional ways, guarding with horses, doing the work that their elders and foreparents had done before to guard the community in their native ways. And also just some recent stories. There were students who did walkouts during COVID-19 movements for other people who weren't able to be present marching, who did that on behalf of other people who weren't able to be there. So for me, I think there's a couple of things. We can take the different stories of people from around the world who did different things, and we can also learn from those stories about the shared threads of the things that tend to work. And I think that's mutual aid, organizing, action, cultural protests of Serbian youth really rocked my world, about how the Serbian youth's cultural symbols were used in the Arab Spring in Egypt. But it started in Serbia. And the Egyptian activists had gone to youth coalitions and learned from the Serbians and brought it there. So I think a big part of this too is about bridge building and coalitions. One of the things I am most passionate about, having grown up in Saudi Arabia during the time I did, was I was really raised to just sort of really see the connections between people, and I've grown for a passion for languages. And I've often thought, oh, the way we could really radically take over this world is if Americans were pushed to learn more than one language in school. The fact that I understand the French language and speak it in an okay way. The French will always continue to correct me, and I love that about French. I feel like I have another personality in French that's more introverted. But that knowing that language helps me understand the movements. It helps me understand the people. It helps me understand why when Dobbs dropped, I was actually supposed to fly to Paris the next day. And I felt a little guilty. I thought, oh, maybe I need to fight here. And my French activist friend said, oh no, you're coming here to our march. And those French feminists shut down downtown Paris for us that day. They're texting me every day now being like, when are you guys gonna shut it all down? So, thank you. This is the anniversary of their movement where over 300 French women came together and said they had abortions, and it changed their country and changed their world. So I just wanted to share that too, because I also share this in the story as well, to say that people have always been using the tools, sharing across these borders that were created by men, sharing across the tools, sharing across our languages, and using things together. And so I want to also put forth the idea of a commons for the next generation, to say, you know, you may be told there's a division between you and the other, but that's imaginary. And what would it be like if we actually came together? There's something I grew up with in Saudi Arabia that I think might come from a proverb there, which is that it's easy to break one stick, but if you have a bundle of sticks, you can't break it. And so that is also one of the stories I want to say, that these stories together, the youth activism, even though they happen in different time and space, these are a bundle of sticks that show young people that there's always been a beating pulse of courage and community and connection. And if we lean toward that, it will always give us the next step toward the good.
Beautiful. That is so inspiring. By the way, I give everybody these, with Gloria Steinem, I have a partnership, and I'd asked her for a phrase that would sort of sum up her philosophy that could fit on a bracelet, supports my organization and her foundation. And she came up with, we are linked, not ranked, which for me, I just feel like that is just so powerful across divides of all different kinds, you know, across borders, race, with the environment. You just, you know, it just feels very powerful. And I feel like everybody is alluding to what we need to come together for today. So I know we want to have time for questions. So I'm going to do, I guess will be a little bit of a speed round of like 2 questions for everybody. But this next one, these 2 last questions, just getting to the heart of the matter. I feel like we've been discussing the various political consequences of this moment in time, but just to like really clearly articulate what is truly at stake if we don't proactively reverse this trend and direction that we're headed on for our daughters and for future generations to come. Sorry to be a downer.
My 14-year-old is in the room, and so that's obviously, I think about this quite a lot and what this means for her generation. I mean, just tangibly, I think, right, not just the right to abortion in banned states, but in every state, the right to birth control, I think we're already there. It's already very much at risk. I think what's at stake is the ability not to be criminalized for negative pregnancy outcomes, whether it's a miscarriage or a stillbirth. A lot of these laws are opening the door to investigations of negative pregnancy outcomes, but I think sort of in the broader sense, it's their world's getting smaller and their humanity that's at stake, right? Already, my daughter's 14, she'll go to college in a couple of years. She's not gonna apply to colleges in half the states in the country, right? Her world has gotten smaller as a result of these laws. And just with everything going on and the way that these laws are being written in the 14th Amendment, the fact that her humanity is being discussed, this is what kills me, as if it's a political talking point. The fact that our personhood is being discussed in courtrooms, that when emergency abortion was in front of the Supreme Court, that there was literally in the oral arguments a moment where they were discussing how many organs would be acceptable for a woman to lose before the state should be required to give her an abortion. I mean, literally, that's where we're at. And so for me, we're already there. It's about our very personhood and humanity.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
So there's so much that I feel about this. One thing that really strikes me is there are countries in this world where the pro-life movement is the movement that is about choice. So they're surprised when they hear the framing of pro-life being used to dominate and control women's bodies, because pro-life is about our lives. And I think about this a lot because I think that the only choice we have if we lose these rights are death. I was thinking about how I live with chronic illnesses, and I've had to, deal with getting cure as a Black woman in our culture and society. And let me tell you, that's a whole other conversation that we can have. But when I think about the dehumanizing parts of that and the reality that there's already pattern and precedence for criminalizing women who look like me and using this as another way to disenfranchise us as voters and also to kill us when we have one of the highest maternal death rates in the world for Black women, it gets very distressing for me to think that this is actually about a death drive and it's about killing us. I lost my mother to uterine cancer, and I have had to have D&Cs as it relates to my own genetic relationship with the same illness. And when I think about the fact that there are certain states that would want me to have to take pregnancy tests if I have to have a D&C to save my life or to do a screening, states that I was born in, that's really distressing to me. So I really want to say that the stakes are life or death.
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to say the same thing. It's just life or death. And so therefore it's constitutional. It's do we have the same rights that men have? And I think what is at stake now is we realize in the banned states, obviously we don't. And the question is, when are people going to fully wake up? I mean, as Jessica has pointed out in her amazing book, the numbers are with us. If you poll, more than a majority of Republicans believe in choice. And so it's really a question of harnessing our political power and our legal power and doing them on parallel tracks. And I also think there will be a wake up as the trickle-down effect begins to take place, which it has already in terms of maternal deaths, which are happening, but also the fact that, for example, just healthcare for everyone is going to start to be impacted. In the state of Idaho, there is only one high-risk OBGYN who works in Boise, Idaho. That's it. So if you have a high-risk pregnancy, if you're a fundamentalist 20-year-old Christian having your fourth child and it's high risk, no luck for you. So this is going to start and also the numbers of residents applying for medical schools in banned states has dropped by 20%. So a lot of people don't want to be oncologists in banned states. So it's going to start affecting everybody, men and women regardless of what your religious beliefs are. So I think Christian nationalism is actually a political loser. And so did Donald Trump when he lied to us when he was running for president, when he wanted to say, oh, I'm really not for Project 2025, I'm not for a national ban, because he knows what the numbers are. And so if any of these laws that Jessica just talked about actually get passed, they're fucked. Because there's gonna be a major backlash. So I do think that what is at stake right now is everything. And it's gonna be about getting the word out, organizing, and fighting.
Well, I mean, that's just, it's a lot to take in. And, I know, even for me and even doing this work, but I just feel like so many of us are feeling so overwhelmed and hopeless. And a lot of people are also feeling like nothing they can do can make a difference. And almost, I've talked to a few people who are almost starting to like disassociate, which of course we can't have. So my last question to everyone is, what is your call to action and what advice do you have on creating change, particularly in a moment like this?
I think I would say just be in the room, and I'll explain what I mean by that. A few months ago, right around the time that Florida passed its 6-week abortion ban, I went down to the state to meet with some abortion providers and tour clinics and meet with the folks who were doing the amendment for ballot measure campaign. And I was doing a tour of this independent clinic, and because the 6-week ban had just passed, it was very, very empty, like the waiting room empty. They're showing us the exam rooms empty, no one's there. And they took us all the way to the back of the building, this back room, windowless. And when we walked in, there were a dozen or more young women, all wearing headsets, all on the phone, booking bus tickets, making hotel accommodations, talking to people about how they could get out of state for that. There was one woman who was texting with a patient who had never been on a plane before to give her the emotional support that she needed to get out of state. And of all the things I've been lucky enough to see in this work, that I got immediately really emotional and it really struck me because it was such a good reminder that as terrible as things are, every single day in every single community in every single state, there are rooms full of women and there are rooms full of activists who are working their asses off, who are using their time, their money, their energy to make sure that if someone needs care that they can get it, whether or not we see it. And so that is something I think that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And so I would say just find a room and be in it.
Yes. Engage your time, talent, or treasure, or all three. If you have it, if you can donate to local abortion funds or those in states with the most dire laws, do that. Protect the most vulnerable. If you can be a clinic escort and stand in front of clinics and help protect people who are getting care, do that. And if you can support organizations who are doing this work who are facing challenges to funding like never before, do that and share your stories. If share stories, uplift stories, uplift the stories of others as well, because the research also shows that abortion storytelling is one of the most effective ways to move hearts and minds on this issue. And so now that we're dealing with algorithmic challenges and blocks to information, it's also really important that we're getting these messages out here with all the tools we have at our disposal.
I of course agree with all of these. The only thing I think I would add two things. One way to share your stories is to subscribe to news outlets. And I think it's time we need to pay for our news right now. We need to pay for local news. We need to pay for local news. We need to pay for real national news. We need to pay for Jessica's incredible stuff. And pay for the voices that are helping us amplify these stories, which are it's all about story. It's all about humanizing the impact of these laws. I also think both obviously engage, donating and working for any of these abortion funds, and there are plenty in New York that are also helping others. It's so important, but also being politically active. I mean, the fact that Susan Crawford just won in Wisconsin is incredibly important. And I have multiple Zooms with these incredible grassroots women who are writing letters for campaigns all across the country. And just doing that from wherever you are, having any kind of political engagement is both incredibly cathartic, let's face it, and also makes a difference. That we all can make a difference if we do one or two things that we are capable of doing.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Again, let's give like a hand to this amazing panel. So much insight and wisdom that they shared today that we can carry forth. But I think now I wanted to open it to any questions. And I think, am I one? Oh, where's Martha? Should I just, where is Martha?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. No, I guess I could just call on people.
I have been in a state of anxiety about this issue since it was overturned. I worked for Planned Parenthood for 3 years. The question, I've been looking forward to this panel so much, and the question is, and I think somebody touched on it, this room isn't packed.
Yeah.
And I'm really disturbed by that, because this room should be packed. We do feel a sense of, we are dissociated from it a bit. We do feel a sense of safety because we live in this state. And I'm so grateful that you're here today to raise some consciousness among people who really are aware of what's going on. But we need to start doing more in this state, in the safe states. What do you think about the room right now? Do you think it's a reflection of the fact that we're in a safe state?
I think that's a great question. I think, yes, I do think that people in pro-choice states are generally, I think people want to feel safe however they can. And I think if you have a reason to be like, well, okay, well, we're all right in New York, it's easy to like take some kind of comfort in a moment like this, right? But yeah, I don't think that people necessarily understand just how in danger abortion access is across the country. Just to give an example, tomorrow the Trump administration could start enforcing something called the Comstock Act, and that would make it illegal to ship abortion medication anywhere, even in New York. 65% of abortions are done using medication. So overnight, even for New York, this would end up being an informal abortion ban. To offer a little bit of hope to it, though, I will say so many people are online.
Yes.
If there's one thing that has like made me feel really good is not the right word because it's a terrible reason to get a lot of subscribers, but like since Roe was overturned, like the newsletter subscribers have just skyrocketed. People are really interested in this issue. They are really talking about it. We're seeing that reflected in elections, right? Susan Crawford, like I do think that people are coming out for it, but yes, we could always do more, especially in blue states.
New York Abortion Access Fund.
Yeah.
Would you want to send your money somewhere?
By the way, I just wanted to add a little thing. Well, it's raining. I know there's the hands-off protest, so I don't know. But I also want to say that I specifically requested from Martha that we video this because I would like to share this. I may write an article. I'm a journalist. I take my role as a journalist very seriously right now. So that's, also what we have to do to make sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Great question.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, okay, we're good? Okay. Okay, yes.
Just coming off of what the woman just asked, what I'm concerned about walking around this room and in every conversation I have, it seems like most of us don't have to worry about getting an abortion. And I don't understand where the young people are. I don't get it. And you had said something, Jessica, but I didn't quite follow it. I don't understand why they don't care. I mean, I've spoken to young graduates and like, why aren't you on the streets? Why am I out there?
No.
I don't know. What do we do?
I mean, I would say two things. I really do think they are there. Like, really and truly, young people are the most pro-choice demographic in the country. When you talk to them, they're not starting their lives and moving to states with abortion bans. They do not want to go to schools in states with abortion bans. abortion bans. I don't necessarily think it's a different generation of like what activism looks like, right? I think for a lot of young people, activism looks like something very different. It feels very online to them. And it doesn't mean that they're not on the street. Sometimes they are, but I would just try to think about, we may not just be where they're at, right? Like they're doing something in some online space, in some online room where there's like 20,000 of them right now, right? Just because they don't show up to particular in real life spaces doesn't mean they're not there. That said, I do think that there's some truth to the idea that some people have lived through this before. Some people have seen the consequences of these bans firsthand, and they have a different sort of knowledge about it. Unfortunately, I do think we are very, very close to getting to a point where every single person in this country is going to be touched in some way by an abortion ban, whether it's because someone they knew was denied care or because they need to wait 3 months for a pap smear in New York because all of the OBGYNs are busy, helping other people. And so I do think that we are not very far off from this being an issue that touches everyone.
And I wanted to say that I think location does matter as it relates to this. So before the election, the Kansas movement and the winning of the Kansas ballot initiative for the pro-choice side was youth-driven. They used so many youth memes. They used online and offline amazing art and graphics and everything. They had some really fun experiences, Western themed. They really made it about their movement, and it actually sort of sent that message, what you were saying before about why the current, what's his number now, 47? I'm trying to, 47. I was like, I can't call him the other thing. 47, one of the reasons that 47 was not going to say what he's going to do is that when they won Kansas and they were starting to see how it was polling in these other places, they realized, oh, some of these young people we want to move for these other reasons, they all pulled up for Planned Parenthood and to stop these ballot initiatives. So as a daughter of the South, but who's been living in New York now for over 20 years, I can say this is a very hot button issue for me because my friends and I were targeted by crisis pregnancy centers in high school because the Hyde Amendment had made people in my community have experiences in Jane Crow already, all the time. And so I already was sort of living this reality, and it's what made it something I was passionate about. My mother, a big part of her work had been about supporting women who'd been forcefully sterilized in prisons in South Carolina. So I also want to say that I think it's coming here as people start to feel it. People aren't feeling it viscerally yet. I've devoted so much of my life to this because I felt it viscerally young. And so I think, unfortunately, one of the things that will happen is there will be more of an awakening. And then the other thing I want to say is, and your TikToks are so good. I've been noticing on TikTok that a lot of the next generation voices are talking about things. They figured out ways to have their own coded language, their own ways of helping get people information for things we may not read to understand, or about how you're getting resourced or how you're resourcing others. But they're doing the work. And I want to just give some kudos to Gloria Steinem, who has been a great friend and mentor in my life. One of the things she said to me was that when she and others came along, Alice Paul had been saying, you all should be doing this, this, and this, because this was what I think you should be upset about. But they were sort of really focused on the thing that brought them in their outrage at that time. And that those two things weren't separate. It was sort of like they came in about, I want to have a credit card in my own name, or I want to be able to get birth control. But then the ERA became something they also cared about. So that's another thing I think is really important. And from some direct community experience I have, I think it's also, there are people who care very much about our issue, but other things that the zone is getting flooded with might make our issue be not the first issue they're thinking about, but they link it. So for example, I used to always say in our coalition meetings that I was a student loan voter first and foremost, because I felt like a slave to my student loans. And then repro. But both of those were actually never separate. There was never a positioning, but sometimes it might have appeared that there was a separation. So I want to say that too, that I think there are a lot of people who are with us who might be focusing more on economic justice rhetoric, but see this as being a part of that larger story.
Great.
Can I also just say, sorry, yes, I would like to applaud any demographic not being in the room, I just want to say, like, where are the men?
Right,
Like,
I was
that
about
is-
to say that
is
too.
the-
That's, yeah.
I think the
And there
big
are some men here,
element.
so like.
There are,
yeah.
but I mean, come on.
No, but exactly, much more, 1,000%. 1,000%, yeah. I was about to say the same thing because, yeah, and I think we have to make men feel included in the conversation because this does even probably, I'm saying sometimes this is thought of as a women's rights issue. It's not a women's rights issue. This is a human rights issue. So that's one thing. I also wanted to say, because talking about young people, we need to get them voting because since the last election, they did not really turn out, and we have to keep our eyes on the midterms. So that's something else that is coming up that will be a real inception point for us to have our voices heard. Do we have time for one last question? Oh, okay, we're fine? Okay.
5:30.
Okay, it's so hard to pick people. I'm gonna choose a man. Sorry, I didn't do that.
For anyone on the panel, what do you think the outlook is at this point, given the Supreme Court makeup for a case making it to the court and actually being successful in reinstating the constitutionality of reproductive rights?
I'm not qualified, but I do feel like the only chance we really have in terms of constitutionality is with massive class actions that prove that abortion bans are constitutionally illegal based on the 14th Amendment. That this has to be about life and liberty, and that was of course the Achilles heel of the Roe case, and that's why it was always vulnerable. And ever since it passed in 1973, the right was very strategic. They knew it was vulnerable and they knew how to kill it over time. And so we have to be equally as strategic legally and figure out what bill is going to be the one that will thread that needle. I can't tell you which one it is, but whenever what case is going to thread that needle. And I'm hoping it may be bubbling up now, because there are a lot of them going on. The Center for Reproductive Rights is doing a heroic job of supporting cases all over the country. So we might not know what it is yet.
So I wanted to say that I'm one of the few non-lawyers on the board of the Center for Repro Rights, and there are lawyers who can speak quite eloquently about what's happening around the world with all of the, and that's one of the reasons I love it, that the work is all connected about this. So I would highly recommend following Center for Reproductive Rights and supporting the work, because the center is always putting forth information about where these cases are and how they affect the bigger picture, and also the ACLU, as well as a really great resource. Their reproductive rights team is also doing this work and keeping our communities updated, and that coalition, as well as the National Women's Law Center, as well, will always have us have the forefront information about what's happening with the courts and where we're standing on state courts as well, and the judiciary, as well as the SCOTUS federally.
This is just really quick, but what about male birth control and vasectomy? All we hear about is, what we have to do. What's
They had
happening
too many
with-
symptoms. I mean, literally, that's what happened. Like there was all of this research. They couldn't keep guys in the research program because they had too many symptoms and they dropped out. I mean, that's sort of still what's happening.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, this is new information for me. I really appreciate it.
I'll speak up here.
Stand up. I appreciate everything that y'all saying and everything. First of all, I also want to say thank you for including men to it. My question would be more that how do you get men involved, get men more involved, helping out? Because yes, there's men that, but there's understanding, there's understanding men out there. Me personally, in the beginning, against abortion all the way. A friend of mine, she was overpowered, and that happened, and we sat down, and she changed my mind instantly, right? So, but I know there's men out there that cares more. How do you get more men involved and to help out, to be a backbone, Because I think the way we're doing it, and I'm not knocking nobody, the way we're doing it to me is, it seems we're separating the future more. I don't know how to say, if I'm saying it right, but it seems like it's gonna be women over here, men over here, and we're supposed to be together. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
how do we bring more men into it? That's my
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you, and thank you for standing up. Thank you for showing up. One thing I'm really excited about, both of our partners are out here. I'm calling you out. You know who you are in the room. So I think that what I love is that there are men who are supporting people who are doing this work in myriad ways. That I think is really important. Help the people who are doing the work with the childcare, with the speaking, with the emotional labor and the support for the things that we have to go through. That's really important. The other thing I would say is I used to teach gender studies at John Jay in the city, and thank you. And when I started doing that, I had a lot of undergrads who would come in, and some of the men who would come into my class would be, I'm gonna take this feminist elective to challenge, they wanted to be debate me bros, as I call it, throughout the whole semester. But they didn't realize, oh no, baby, I was raised evangelical, so I'd love to be engaged in giving you the good news and a missionary for my causes. And so when we would have these conversations in class, I would say, if you can argue your point to me well, you'll still get a good grade, even if we disagree. And what I really learned was that a lot of the people who came in were actually really misinformed about the realities of abortion, what the laws are, what they aren't. There's no such thing as partial birth abortion, for example, right? But that is, thank you. There's no medically accurate, there's so many things like that I would have really well-intentioned young people who would come into my classes thinking that they had been educated rightly, who were actually victims of an education system that had been taken over by misinformation and disinformation. So rather than shaming them, it was actually about getting into conversations and sharing stories and data, showing them documentaries, giving them books like yours to read and to debate about and talk about. And the majority of those people at the end of the class, I would always ask in the beginning, who's a feminist in this class, to raise your hand, and maybe half the class would not. Everyone, even the ones who would debate me, would raise their hands in the end when they realized that ultimately most people agree that we should have the right to make our own medical decisions with ourselves and our conscience, and also have constitutional equality, which we do not have as women in this country. So it was, I want to share that because what I really learned in that was that shaming is not an effective tactic for us, nor is it strategic, nor is it kind. What I learned is if you really get curious about how people came to these conclusions and educate them about the realities and the realities of how these policies impact people and their lives, it actually moves them. And the last thing I'll say about men, and I'm speaking specifically about the community I grew up with in North Carolina, there are men who were in my family who really had a problem with the fact that I was working at Planned Parenthood and the work. But some of those men, when I took them to a clinic and they saw women being harassed on the way to get care, became very pro-choice. So I also believe that it's important for us to build those bridges and to connect with people, like you said, and to create the invitation to help people grow on their own behalf and not make assumptions that people don't want to build and grow with us.
To that a quick second. A couple of things. One, I think that you hit on something really important, that we have an entry point even with more moderate men, which is this idea of men as protectors, right? We're in a moment when women are dying, women are going septic, right? If you consider yourself a protector of the women in your life, this is a way that you can show up. I think that is a really terrific entry point. The second thing is I've heard from a lot of men who are interested, they want to get involved, but they're afraid of mansplaining, they're afraid of taking up too much space. And what I sort of tell them is that'll probably happen, and you sort of have to deal with the discomfort of that, right? Like, show up anyway, someone's gonna say you're taking up too much space, and like, that's it, and that's fine. That's okay, because you're there, and we need your presence, and it's important. And then just the last thing I want to say is this is why I think so much about young people. There's a crisis with young men in this country. They are being indoctrinated by the far right. If we don't address that, then it's all for nothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should do this for 2.5 hours. No. Buy books, bring your books up, everybody will be sitting here, they'll sign them.
Thank you for
Okay?
this panel.
This was great.
Thank you.